بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون واتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردن الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا إنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر والليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم أن لا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وليعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند مهضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متدلل خاشع أن تصامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك السؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند شدائد حاجته وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب كحرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائه ساترا ولا لشيء من أملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته وكم من فادح من بلاء أقلته وكم من إثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أحلا له نشرته. اللهم أظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوهالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني النفع بعد أملي وخضعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء أملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سره ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور أطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ذري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أحوى وأسأده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعد أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاءك. وألزمني حكمك وبلاغك، وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تفسيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا، مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا مؤترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني، ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليك في أمري، غير قبولك أدري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ذري، وفكني من شدي وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، حبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنار بعد توحيدك، وبعد ما انطوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولهج به لساني من ذكره، واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات، أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته، أو تبعد من أدنيته، أو تشرد من آويته، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك الصادقة وبشكرك مادحة، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة، وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك الطائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك، ولا أخبرنا بفضلك أنك يا كريم. يا ربي، وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثوح، يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته، فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل أقوى المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. هذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي، فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الضليل الحكير المسكين المستكين؟ يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو، ولما منها أضج أبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدتي، أم لطول البلاء ومدتي. فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك، وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك، وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك، فكيف أصبر على فراقك؟ وهبني صبرت على حر نارك، فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك؟ أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك؟ فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا، لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج العاملين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين. ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته، وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته، وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيجا مؤملا لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي، فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحركه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه ضفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رباه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركوه فيها؟ هيهات، ما ذلك الظن بك، ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما آملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسان، فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاهديك وقضيت به من إخلاج معاندين، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كانت لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا، وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما، أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريته، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته، وكل ذنب أذنبته، وكل قبيح أسررته، وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته، أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر هذني من كل خير أنزلته أو إحسان فضلته أو بر نشرته أو رزق بسطته أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك مأمورا وبخدمتك موصولا، وأعمالي عندك مقبولا، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك السرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه مؤولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، قو على خدمتك جوارحي، واشدد على العظيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك، والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين، وأسري إليك في المبادرين، واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وخافك مخافة الموقنين، واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخصهم ظلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. وجد لي بجودك، واعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهيجا، وقلبي بحبكم متيما، ومن علي حسن إجابتك، وأقلني أثرتي، واغفر ظلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بإبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي، ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي. يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء، يا من اسمه دواء، وذكره الشفاء، وطاعته غنى. ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء، وسلاهه البكاء. يا سابغ النعم، يا دافع النقم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بما أنت أحنه، وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
صلوا على النبي. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. जब लुट के करबला से असीरे सितम चले, सज्जाद सर बरहना बदर दो आलम चले, रोते सरों को पीटते पाबंद गम चले, ज़ैनब शीशे से कहा भाई हम चले, मरने से आपके में इज़ाए उठाती हूँ, दरबार में यजीद के सर नंगे जाती हूँ। भाई तुम्हारी दूर से मर जाएगी बहन, क्यों कर तुम्हारी लाश को दफनाएगी बहन, काहे को छूट के कैद से अब आएगी बहन, किस तरह आपको यहाँ पाएगी बहन, नाचार क़ैद ज़ुल्म में ये ख़स्ततन चली, लो भाई शहरे शाम के जानिब बहन चली, ए नई नवा अली की बिज़ाअत तुझे मिली, ए करबला खुदा की अमानत तुझे मिली, ए खाक मेरी माँ की रियाज़त तुझे मिली, ले ज़मीन शम्मे इमामत तुझे मिली, दामन तेरा बरा मेरी खेती उजर गई, सरहद मोहब्बत में तेरी बाइसे ज़ैनब बिछड़ गई। सल्लु अला नबी अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद अज्जिल फरजहुम।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Respected scholar, my elders, brothers, sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all the names listed on the screen and Kul Marhamin Al-Fatiha. Ayama Yajibun is requested for all the names listed on the screen and whoever is in need of it here and elsewhere. Let us all recite it together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu su. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu su. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام التحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين المكرمين الخيرين الفاضلين السيدين الصادقين سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين للتراب مقدمه الفداء. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بأبي عبد الله عليه الصلاة والسلام. May Allah accept your azah in this holy month and the sessions which are coming up for all those who have recited poetry, who have helped in sponsoring niyaz and tabarruk and all the various tabarrukat. Whatever we're able to give in this holy month, may Allah accept it from us. And may Allah help us get the tawfiq so that we can use these holy months of Muharram and Safar, this institution, educational institution and spiritual cosmological event of Karbala. May Allah make this a tawfiq for us to improve ourselves, to progress, and become the ideal companions for the Imam of the time. We are going to continue with our series that we left before the month of Muharram, which was about how to adopt an Islamic lifestyle. The first subtopic that we talked about was what is a lifestyle. After we figured out that a lifestyle is a person's choices and the way that they view reality, everything that they do is based on this lifestyle choice. Then we said, okay, we want to ideally adopt an Islamic lifestyle, but we're not sure whether Islam really provides that or not. Does Islam actually tell us and give us information and advice for every single little detail about our lives? So our next question was, is Islam full-time or part-time? Meaning, is the domain of Islam every single thing that we have to deal with in life? Or is it something more restricted? Is it full-time or is it part-time? The first point that we discussed was going through the history of this question first. Where did this idea about asking whether or not whether religion itself is something that's a complete idea, it's a complete lifestyle, or was it always understood as something that was limited, restricted, and part-time? We started by looking at the early European history, right? Going through the Dark Middle Ages, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the modern age, up until right now, where we saw the results of all of this, of what happened in the West, of postmodernism, of people just not believing in truth at all, completely abandoning the most obvious truths of the world, not accepting science, not accepting rationality, not accepting religion, only acting upon their own desires, only what they want, talking about institutions of power and systems, and trying to be the loudest people in the room to get what they want. But we also saw that one of the results was that some people, they realized that, well, postmodernism is a joke, right? There is obviously truth out there. If we can't find it in science because of the limitations of science, if we can't find it in just pure rationality because of the limitations of rationality, then we need to go further back and go back towards religion. So this was, you saw one trend was postmodernism of no truth and just do whatever you want. But others said, no, let's go back to before all of this stuff happened in Europe. Let's go back to the pre-modern age, the traditional age, the classical age, where people used religion to help guide them completely in all aspects of their life. So these are the sort of different trends that you can see right now in our, within anybody. And this is not just something that we find with non-Muslims. It's not just something that you find within, let's say, Sunnis, but these sort of trends you'll see within Shia Islam as well. And this is one of the points that eventually we wanted to lead up to. And inshallah, now that we've hit the next part of our discussion, our next subtopic, that's what we are going to do. We are going to see what is going on in the Islamic world. So starting tonight, the first thing is, what is Islam? What is Islam's role? And what are the different approaches that scholars have taken in regard addressing this sort of issue and dilemma? And do we have these sort of, let's say, pure rationalistic scholars? Do we have those who, see that there's a fight between religion and science? Do we have quote unquote postmodern scholars? Those who believe in Islam yet, throw it away in some instances? What exactly do we have to do with the discussion? Hopefully, after understanding the history of Europe, this now can make a bit more sense to us, because you and I are dealing with a lot of different Shia scholarship right now. Many of you, I'm sure, are just following, let's say, the traditional classical model. We have Maraji' in the Hawza, they give their traditional opinions, and we follow them, and that's it. But very recently, we've seen this new movement, this new trend of what some people call this new liberal Islam or progressive Islam, or again, what we may call a part-time or rational Islam, which focuses on things about spirit of the law, or using the ideas that are common in our time and place and age right now, and not referring to things that have happened hundreds or thousands of years ago. So the same things which were taking place in Europe, we seem to see the same discussions taking place within the Shia world right now. That's where we wanted to lead up to figure out what do we do when we see these disagreements. So, now I know that this is more of a kind of a housekeeping rule. So ideally, because a lot of the concepts we're dealing with may be difficult for us to kind of comprehend, hopefully, alhamdulillah, we have these notes that are helpful at the bottom. But, the quiz that we used to have at the end, we are, for the month of Muharram and Safar, just out of respect to those who may find it a bit disrespectful, we are going to put that on hold for now. So we're going to put that on pause. And I know some of you found a lot of benefit there. But again, I know that there may be some of those who are a bit sensitive to that idea. So we are not going to be offering the quiz, and we'll wait till after the month of Safar, and then we'll start the quiz again. And since this is the month of Muharram and Safar, for all of the different speeches, the majalis that we will hold on Thursdays and any of the other occasions that come forward, in place of the quiz, that's where we'll be offering just a few short words, not too much, just a few words of masa'ib before we go on to the matam and latmiya and the nohas, in order to pay our respects to the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and so that we can maintain this emotional connection to the tragedy of Karbala. Because as we will see, that this is one of the major issues of taking a pure rational approach to religion. It's not just about us learning history. This is not just about us learning some facts and figures and memorizing ideas. This is not just about some, philosophical theories as well. The reason that we've maintained the idea of reciting poetry, of marthiyah, of marsiya, of sos, salam, of matam, of latmiyat, all of these ideas are so that we can take the intellect, take the rational portion of our religion, the theoretical part, and then use this emotional part as well and help us strengthen both of these so that we get a call to action. Because a lot of people, they say, especially we hear this nowadays, that, we don't need this reminder all the time. We don't need poetry. What's the point of this emotional nonsense? Let's just learn some stuff and that's it. Look, we're not against the concept of learning. Of course, we all need to learn. We all need to improve. But why would we ever want to deny the fact that we as human beings have an emotional side as well? This is not something negative. Shedding tears, crying, feeling that emotional connection to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, to his family, to his companions, to all of the shuhada, this is something that is in our fitrah. It's innate in us, where it's part of us as human beings, and we never want to throw that idea away. So we are going to recite just a few short words of masa'ib in all these different sessions that we hold in these next 2 months. So what we want to talk about again today is, firstly, what's the history of Islam in terms of this clash between religion and science and rationality? How did things, if at all, did they change over time? And what were the responses of our ulama? And what sort of trends do we see right now among the different Muslim scholars regarding the issue of using science or using reason when it comes to understanding what is Islam? Is it something that tells us all about the world? That tells us all about reality? It will tell us every single little thing about life? Or no, is it that Islam only gives us a little bit of information, the bare minimum that we need, the minimalist version of religion, and that's it? Everything else we can figure out using science or rationality. So this will be our discussion tonight. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, now let's jump to the Islamic world. So, we know that in Europe, everybody was freaking out, right? Once they found these issues within the religious establishment that we talked about in the Dark Ages, once science began to become more prominent and rationality became more prominent, then that's where we saw, right? I'm not going to go over all the history. We saw that that's where the Christians, they began to figure out, and even Jews, they were putting religion against science. And then we saw over time, they slowly abandoned religion, right? They made its originally great depth and breadth smaller and smaller and smaller till religion just became reduced to a few different things. And then everything else in life was taken over by science and rationality. But what about Islam? What was going on in the Islamic world, in the Islamic Empire? At the beginning of the Islamic Empire, there was no fight between religion and science. There was no fight between religion and rationality. People didn't see an issue. Our scholars didn't see an issue. The imams didn't see an issue, right? The Prophet didn't see an issue. This was never an issue for Muslims, as it was, initially at least, for the Europeans or for the Western world. And why is it the case? Why is it that Muslims never really had these religious issues in dealing with whether Islam was complete or not? It's because of the fact that what they believed was clearly in the Quran, in the Ahadith, Islam was described as a complete way of life. It was all inclusive. It was completely comprehensive, and it was the final word of Allah. With all of these different traits, then they said, okay, if this is the final, complete, absolute word of God, then any other idea that comes, whether it's some rational idea or it's a scientific idea, then this becomes secondary, right? Religion tells us all the things we need, and then we can use our rationality and we can use our scientific method as a tool to understand a few things, but it will never ever supersede religion. Religion will be our lens, our paradigm, and our worldview to describe everything we need in life. But we can also use rationality and science to help in a few different places here and there, as long as it doesn't go against religion. So it was simple. And therefore, they never saw this contradiction. They never saw that the intellect would contradict religion. They never saw that scientific discoveries would contradict Islam. So there was never an issue for Muslims, right? Even as new scientific discoveries would be made and new theories would develop, that never affected their understanding of religion. So even when, again, a new theory would come out, they would look at the Quran and they would look at the Hadith, and if they saw something different, then they wouldn't look at it in terms of there being a clash, right? They always say, look, we just maybe haven't understood the religious idea, or perhaps we've made a mistake in the scientific idea, but we would never observe that there's a clash between the two. However, this was in the beginning of Islam. What happened is gradually over time, especially in the, let's say the middle imams, right? I'd say maybe around the 5th, 6th imam, especially onwards, you start to see that gradually, little by little, some fights and some changes started to develop. Now, why is that? It's because you started to see these new sects in Islam, these new schools of thought, new madhahib, and new approaches that weren't there around the time of the Prophet, nor were they there around the time of the first few imams. It's something that came around the Abbasid time, very specifically, right? Why? Because a lot of things started to come from the outside, right? From the Greeks, for example. They began to grab works from all around the world and to translate them and to disseminate it among the Muslims. So from there, you started to get a few different Muslims with their brand new sects, brand new schools of thought, brand new madhahib and approaches, and they had some very interesting claims. They said, we are going to bring a new sharia, a new path of Islam. The old one is outdated, we're going to give you a new one. Using, a rational method or a scientific method. Or they say, look, the divine teachings that the Prophet had brought, we're going to update that. We're going to update those divine teachings to work with what we find right now from the conclusions of science and rationality. Or they began to do this, what we call a progressive, rational, or scientific tafsir. So they would get these new rational scientific discoveries. They say, this is actually the word, this is truth. Then they would apply that and force feed that into the Quran and into the narrations of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. And how could they do that though? It's because of that initial original idea that allowed for the original Muslims to believe that Islam wasn't going to change, but challenging this idea gave rise to some of these newer Muslims, these new groups, because they challenged two ideas. This gave them the leeway and the permission, so to speak, of challenging Islam, of challenging the old traditional Islam and bringing a new one. What were these two ideas? It was Khatimiyya and Jami'iyya. The Khatimiyya of Islam, meaning that Islam is Khatamul Deen or Khatamul Adyan. It's the final religion. It's the last one. Right? There's nothing else after this. And the other one is what? Jami'iyya, is the all-inclusive, all-encompassing, absolute nature of the religion of Islam. That Islam addresses every single thing. These were challenged by this new group. So the new group said, look, we do not believe that Islam has the final say on everything. And we also don't believe that Islam encompasses everything as well. So Islam is not doesn't have the final word. And even if it does say something, right? So if it does say something, it doesn't mean it's the last word. So things can change. And it doesn't necessarily have to address everything. Maybe Islam doesn't address, let's say, the nature of atoms. Maybe it doesn't, right? Islam is not all-inclusive. Maybe it doesn't talk about chemistry or engineering or nutrition or whatever. So they denied the finality, right, of the religion, and they also denied the comprehensive nature of the religion. Now, when this happened, again, we see this is where Islamic scholarship is booming now, right? During the Abbasid era, the Imams are still there, obviously, so they're teaching some of their students to address some of these issues. So there's a lot of heated internal discussions among the Muslims, a lot of disagreements, and a lot of debates. They're fighting back and forth about, what's going on here. So you see the vast majority of the Muslims, they take three specific types of responses in order to respond to these new sort of foreign or unorthodox sects and schools of thought that develop within the Islamic world. So what we're going to discuss now are what were the three responses that traditionally the Muslims at that time, they gave to these sort of new progressive sort of foreign ideas and challenges to Islam. So let's start with those three approaches. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So we have three different groups and three different approaches. The first group are the ones who are the traditionalists. And they said, look, all of you who challenge Islam and this traditional nature of Islam, you won't deny that we have to at least figure out what does the Quran say and what do the narration say. What is the Quran? What is the Sunnah? We have to look at the ayat and the riwayat. From there, we can determine whether Islam itself tells us if it's the Khatamul Adyan, is it the last religion? And if it does explain everything, is it Jami', right? Is Islam all-inclusive or not? So I don't want to enter into all the proofs now. I'm going to give you just the simple ones, two simple verses that were used, because later on when we get deeper into the discussion and we go back and forth between the modern day Muslims, we're going to bring some more of those proofs there. But I think these two should suffice, right? They're good enough now. So the first piece of evidence that these traditionalists used, they said, look, every Muslim needs to go to the Quran. Let's look very clearly. We'll ask the Quran the question, is this religion complete? Does it have the final say? Is there going to be any sort of new information afterwards? Will there be another prophet? Will there be another teaching that the prophet didn't bring? Right? Is Islam khatam or not? Is it the last one? Is it the seal? Is it the final religion or not? And they said very clearly, obviously, yeah. The prophet, of course, right, he's addressed as Khatam al-Anbiya, but specifically, they're saying not the prophet. Let's talk about the religion itself. So they use the verse, the ayah, which is very famous, that we all know, and most of us have memorized, at least a part of it memorized, which is known as Ayatul Kamal, the ayah of perfection, which is in Surah Al-Ma'idah, right, chapter 5, verse 3, where Allah says, at least the part of it, which all of us, as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, we pretty much have memorized, is A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Al-Yawm Akmaltu Al-Yawm Akmaltu Lakum Dinakum Wa Atmamtu Alaykum Ni'mati Wa Raditu Lakum Al-Islam Dina. Right? So, this day of Ghadir, which is very, very famous, that nobody can deny, what is the Prophet? What has been told to the Prophet? He says, look, Allah saying, on this day, I have done Akmaltu lakum dinakum. I have perfected your religion. Your deen is perfect. You're perfect now, right? Akmaltu, meaning it's kamal. It's been perfected. What else? وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي. My ni'mah, God is saying, my blessings for you are tamam. They're done. That's it. It's over. وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا. And I am happy and I'm pleased with you. I'm radi and I've approved Islam as your religion. That's it. This specific verse can help us understand and respond to anybody who says that, no, the religion, there's more to it. What do you mean there's more to it? Allah's saying, that's it. It's perfect. It's complete. I'm done. Islam, the one that's being revealed there, that's it. We're done. There's nothing else. There's no new ideas that are going to come afterwards. No new prophets, right? No changes to the Sharia, nothing like that. So this is one of the two verses, or one of the many verses, that the traditional scholars would use at that time to say, look, you're saying that the religion is not final. God is clearly, in clear words, telling you the religion is done. So you don't have a right to go and change it afterwards. Now, okay, let's say that's the case. But what about whether Islam and the final religion, does it address every single thing in our life? Is it all inclusive? Or are there parts that are, God doesn't care about, na'udhu billah, or parts that are missing? Well, this is where they say, let's go to Ayatut Tibyan, the verse of clarification, or the verse of explanation. This is in, and there's many verses like this, but at least one example is in Surah Al-Nahl, right? Chapter 16, verse 89, where Allah says there, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ تِبِيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةً وَبُشْرًى لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ. And Allah says, we have sent down to you al-kitab. We've sent down to you the book. يعني, right? Meaning what? The Quran. We've sent down to you the Quran. For what? What's the purpose? تِبِيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. To explain, to clarify kulli shay, every single thing for you. And what else on top of that? وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةً. And it's a guidance. It's meant to guide you. And it's a rahmah, and it's a mercy for you. And it's a bushra lil muslimin. And it's a piece of good news for all the Muslims. I mean, think about it. If, we were then, back then, and somebody said, okay, this book that I'm giving you, every single problem that you have in life, it's going to be answered here. Right? And of course, we know that from the hadith of Thaqalain that there's two parts of that. There's the actual physical or written Quran, and then there's the speaking Quran. We know that the Prophet obviously is going and explaining everything. We know that afterwards we have the Imams to go and explain and elucidate that book as well. So with this Thaqalain, every single thing, every single issue in life is being explained to us. So for these individuals who say, no, religion's not final and religion's not all inclusive, we would ask them, as these traditional scholars did, how do you respond to this? How can you answer the Quran when the Quran is clearly telling you Islam is the final religion that Allah has chosen, and also it is all inclusive and that it explains every single facet of our lives? This was the first type of response that was given by the traditional scholars. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So there's a second group as well. So the first group were your traditionalists, right? Those who heavily relied on the Quran, the ayat, and the riwayat. But then you had the mutakallimin, right? The theologians, who took a very simple and rational approach. They said, look, we agree with the traditionalists that look at the Quran, look at the hadith, it's very obvious, right? And again, I didn't bring in any narrations because, one, lack of time, and because we'll get to that much later on in our discussion. But the mutakallimin said, yeah, we have all those proofs, but we also have a simple rational proof as well, right? The simple rational proof is based on something that's called qa'idatul lutf. It's a rational principle that we have in theology called the principle of lutf, the rule of lutf, the principle of grace or kindness. So in a nutshell, what is this principle? This principle that they have rationally understood and have proven, our mutakallimin, our theologians, they say that, look, once we've proven that God exists, we start looking at his attributes. And his attributes are that he's kind and he's graceful. He only does what is kind and graceful. And therefore, we recognize that every single thing that Allah does, every act that he performs, the sole purpose of those acts, or the sort of standard operating procedure for those acts is what? Is that those things that Allah does, every single thing that happens in our life is and has to be a way for us to improve ourselves, to get closer to God, to gain his ma'rifah, and to help us prevent ourselves from sinning. This is grace. This is the grace of God. So if ever we have an issue, a religious issue we're trying to solve, everything should go back to this principle of grace, right? So this sort of idea of qaidatul lutf, right, this principle of grace, this has also been used to prove the need for why we have prophets. Why do we need prophets? Why do we need imams? And what's the purpose of the ghaiba, right? Why is the imam, the last imam, not here? And they say, look, we've proven this rational principle that every single thing that God does, he has to guide us. He has to give us our benefits. He has to show us how to improve ourselves. So he'll send down prophets to guide us. He sends down the Quran with the prophet, right, to guide us, and all these other books. He gives the imams to us so that they can explain things that might come up in our lives. And the ghaiba as well, right? The ghaiba itself, there is a benefit to us. Right now, what are those benefits? Of course, we hear, we know the narration about sun behind the clouds and all that. It's not our topic, so I'm not going to get into that. But those of you who have read up on the topic, this is the idea they give. Besides using the Quran, besides using the riwayat, they said logically, rationally, God is everything that he does. Even if it seems strange to us, it's for our benefit. It's out of God's grace why these things happen. And we have to use these as opportunities to improve ourselves. So, therefore, every action, every behavior, every single word we utter, anything that we build, anything we destroy, anything we buy or sell, anywhere we look, anything that we shut our eyes off to, if we cook or clean, whatever we do, each and everything has a potential effect on our soul. It can have a potential effect on our journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it could possibly take us away from God, meaning it could possibly take us out of God's grace. Therefore, what they conclude is that based on this qa'idatul lutf, the principle of grace, God must address and explain every single facet of our lives. Whether it's engineering, whether it's chemistry, whether it's cooking, whether it's nutrition, whether it's how to sleep, how to go to the bathroom, every part of our life needs to be explained by God, and we need to get permission from him before we do anything. This is how they applied the principle, and this is the response they gave to these new sort of movements that existed at that time. So this is our second group and second approach that we've gone through. Now let's go through the final group and the final approach. Who are the philosophers? Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So the philosophers, of course, they don't disagree, right, with the approach of using the Quran, the ayat and the riwayat. Of course, they don't deny that, sort of rational idea of that God, is one of his primary driving factors is giving us the best thing for us as humans, that he's graceful. But our philosophers have taken a different approach. And they use this idea of something called the Madinatul Fadila. The Madinatul Fadila, which roughly translates to the virtuous city. So the virtuous city, it's two things. It's one, just a general sort of concept that exists among philosophers, but it's also a original sort of idea and even a book that was written by one of our famous Muslim philosophers by the name of Abu Nasr Muhammad ibn Muhammad Farabi, right? Famous sort of scholar who was alive between 872 to 950 in the Common Era. This Farabi, this famous philosopher, he was known as Al-Muallim Al-Thani, right? The second teacher. Because they say that, the first teacher, Muallim Al-Awwal, in terms of philosophy, was Aristotle. The second teacher, who followed in Aristotle's sort of trend and his line of thought, was Farabi. He's written many different works. He's very, very famous, and he's had a huge impact on modern day philosophy. So in this work, he talks about this idea of building up a virtuous society or building a virtuous city. How does this happen? And again, it's a huge discussion, obviously, but I'm just going to summarize it in terms of how they use this. The philosophers use this idea to respond to these New Age sort of Muslims that existed at that time. He said, look, one of the major points of Islam, what Allah desires from us is to build what is this Madinatul Fadila, this sort of utopia, this virtuous city, a city where virtue, being good, is the major function. Not freedom, not justice, not liberty, not capitalism, none of these ideas. It's about virtue, right? The same thing that Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all these major philosophers talked about. This is what many of the Muslim philosophers argued for as well. That one of God's major ideas for us is to build a virtuous society, a virtuous community, a virtuous civilization. Now, how do you do that? Well, what God does then is he sends down virtuous individuals. He sends down a virtuous leader so that they can lead these virtuous societies. So we send down prophets, right? So for example, he sends down Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And this was one of the Prophet's main, if not his main function, right? Is to help organize a proper society, a proper virtuous civilization. Now, to have a virtuous city or virtuous civilization, you need to have a virtuous leader, right? And in order to have a virtuous leader, what does he need? He needs to have virtue himself, right? He needs to be the most virtuous. He needs to be perfect. He needs to have this sort of divine representation and divine values. Therefore, he has to bring a virtuous religion. So, from the perfect virtues, which are from God, from religion, God sends down a virtuous leader. And that virtuous leader develops and creates a utopian society and a utopian virtuous city. They say this shows us why using our rationality is not going to work, nor is using science going to work in that sense. They are too limited, and we need a higher level, a religious revelatory source to explain what to do in our life. And that can only come from the Prophet. And when we have that, when we have these teachings, what do we know? He is Khatumul Anbiya. He's the last one. He has brought down the final religion, the perfect religion. So there isn't going to be anything after this. So this is the way that they also, the philosophers, replied to these New Age sort of thinkers during that time to say, no, the religion is final. It was brought by the most virtuous individual in all of history, in all of humanity, and they brought it down from the most virtuous religion. From this, we accept and we conclude the idea with these three different approaches that Islam is complete, all-encompassing, and it's final. There's nothing else after that. There's no changes, nothing like that. All we can say is that as things go and progress, yes, you need imams to explain new incidents, but the sharia, the message, the religion will always stay the same. And as the famous narration says, halal Muhammad, halal ila yawm al-qiyamah, wa haram Muhammad, haram ila yawm al-qiyamah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That the rules, the halal and haram, from what the Prophet had brought, that's going to be the same until the end of times. That's it. But this was all history. This was all back then. And pretty much that, kind of destroyed the discussion, and Muslims, so to speak, went back to normal. But then things changed, right? So for hundreds of years, they were fine. Muslims are fine. But then all of a sudden, and maybe as early as or as late as maybe the last 100 years, things have started to change again. And we start to see that Muslims have become affected by two things. The transformation in the West, right? Meaning the history that we covered about the Dark Ages all the way up to the modern times, that the Muslim scholars began to see that, and they began to compare Islam with Christianity. And they said, hey, maybe we need a reformation. Maybe we need to re-examine the Quran. Maybe we need to re-examine our narrations. Maybe we should use science and rationality, right? So they just started rehashing the same sort of arguments. Or they took the ideas and they put it into newer language, or they sort of copied and pasted from the Christians. What they started to do is advocate this idea of a part-time, limited, restricted version of Islam. That Islam doesn't give us all the information we need. Or some of them even say that no, Islam tells us specifically that God won't tell you about certain actions, or God only tells you to do things regarding your time and place. So as an example, they say hijab was something only for that Arab society 1400 years ago. But right now, because the spirit of Islam was about modesty, what was modest was hijab back then, but right now, modesty is different. You don't have to observe hijab anymore. Or they'll say handshaking. Handshaking back then, yes, physical touch with the opposite gender, that was not allowed. But right now, people think that it's rude or disrespectful, or it's seen as to be strange. So Islam updates itself to what's going on in this time, in this era. And then we can shake hands with the opposite gender. It's not a big deal. And many of the other examples that I'm sure many of you recognize. How now do we approach this sort of discussion? This is where we are going to continue. And now, what we'll start next time, inshallah, which I think our next session will probably be Monday night. What we'll then talk about is what are the different approaches that right now all the Muslims take in terms of looking at, religion, in terms of science, in terms of reasoning, in terms of progressivism, and all these ideas. What are the approaches that our scholars right now are taking in contemporary times? And how are we going to approach the discussion as well? And then from there, we can start to enter in and look at the proofs for those who say Islam has an original spirit, which was final, and that spirit will start to apply differently throughout time and place. So that's what we're going to start examining, inshallah, in our upcoming sessions. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, many of you might think, it's Muharram, right? Why are we mentioning these sort of ideas? So, what value does this stuff have? Why don't we talk about something related to the history of Karbala, or what happened to the Ahlul Bayt, etc.? Why are we, Hasan, why are you wasting your time with this stuff? It's not necessary, it's useless, disrespectful, etc. If we look back at the history, honestly look back at what really took place after Ghadir, after Saqifa, around that time, if you take an honest look at history, you'll see that a lot of these ideas were the same things that were brought up about people who wanted to deny the wilaya of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They said, you know what, Ali, maybe you're fine, you know a lot of stuff about religion, but you don't know how to run a government. You don't know how to lead an army. You don't know how to engage in economics. You don't know how to run a business. Don't we hear the same idea from certain other individuals, whether it's among the Ahlul Sunnah or within certain Shias, that, even if we agree that the Prophet and the Imams are perfect individuals and they're infallible, well, they're only infallible in religious ideas, in spiritual stuff, but they don't know how to run a business. They don't know about nutrition. Forget all that stuff. These ideas were around that same exact time. And these were some of the same arguments that were brought up to deny the absolute walaya of the Ahlul Bayt. This is something that existed then. So this discussion that we're dealing with right now is something that led to Karbala itself. So this does have historical relevance for us. Look at how, as we progress through time, we see the Umayyads, how they slowly abandoned religion and made it more and more of a part-time idea and began to introduce new ideas and a new Sharia, new bid'ahs, as they like to say. As we go forward to the Abbasid era, where Farabi was alive during that time, the Abbasids were doing what? They were bringing in these new scientific, rational ideas, and they were saying, yes, we accept and we have love for the Ahlul Bayt, but that's all we have to do. Just love them, know that they are spiritual people, they're akhlaqi people, they're moral people, but we can't accept their stuff about government. We don't need them to lead. Right? We just need them to be figureheads. That's it. So all of these same ideas existed. And if we want to make sure that we don't pull this same sort of mistake when it comes to the Imam of the time, or with Islam right now, then we need to be very, very clear which idea is correct. That's why this is very important for us to go through and figure out how to apply it right now. We don't want to be the ones on the wrong side of history. We don't want to be the ones who are saying foolish things that na'udhu billah, like Imam Hussein was simply fighting for a political war, a political fight. We don't want to be limiting Imam Hussein to say that, oh, he was just some sort of social justice warrior. Anytime we limit these things, we are completely missing the point of Karbala. We are completely missing the point of the Imam's stand. And we are going to misunderstand any other Imam's actions within their own time. So keep this in mind, inshallah, as we go forward in our discussion. Now, I'd like us to take our hearts and our minds back to Karbala. As we remember, and as we sometimes think that after Ashura, that the tragedy of Karbala has come to an end. Many of us think that the worst has ended. The day of Ashura, the killing of the companions of Hussein, the killing of the family of Hussein, and the final killing and shahada of Imam Hussein, that was the peak, that was the worst. But for those of us who really recognize what tragedy is, what bala is, then we know that no, for the Ahlul Bayt, for the family of Hussein, for the Haram of Rasulullah, for Imam Zainul Abidin, for Bibi Zainab, for all the other women and the young children, this is where the tragedy really continues on and it really begins. The struggle really begins here. After witnessing everything on that day, now on the night, as things began to change after or during Sham-e-Ghariban, on that final night, the shock of what took place on that day begins to seep into their minds, begins to seep into their hearts. And they recognize that now their job will be to spread this message to everyone else. The job of the Ahlul Bayt will be to spread the message of Karbala to those in Kufa, to those in Sham, to those in Medina, to Makkah, to all the Muslims who unfortunately weren't there to protect and defend Islam. We're told that when the Yazidi forces, when the Umar ibn Saad's forces had come, they had burned the tents. And they say this is now where we see the strength of Bibi Zainab come. Where one witness at Karbala says that I saw this old lady with a young person on her back walking out of a burning tent and then placing this young individual onto a mattress. We would know who that is. We would know that this is Bibi Zainab saving the concept of imama, saving the concept of walaya, and carrying Imam Sajjad on her back and putting him on a mattress outside. But the forces of Shimr come. Shimr looks and everybody's saying, who is this individual? Shouldn't we kill him as well? Bibi Zainab has to defend Imam Sajjad again. They're told that no, leave this child alone. Shimr begins whipping him over and over again. This ill imam of ours who's already struggling to deal with what he has witnessed on this a few hours ago. After all these calamities, now perhaps this is where Bibi Zainab is remembering all of the different things that Imam Hussein had said to her and said to her before they had said their final wida. Maybe this is where Bibi Zainab was remembering that when Hussein was leaving, that she had asked and wanted to perform her final wasiyah to her brother Hussein. Maybe she was remembering when she said, Hussein, before you go, I have to complete the wasiyah of our mother Fatima. Let me see your neck. Open up your collar just a bit. So Hussein opens up his collar and she begins kissing the neck of Hussein. And why is she doing this? Because they say this is the place where the dagger, the rough dagger of the soldier will come and cut the head of Hussein. And some say this is where Imam Hussein also says to Zainab, that Zainab, I have a wasiyah from our father too that I need to complete. He says, let me see your wrists. Hussein looks and takes the wrists of Zainab and begins kissing them as well. And we say that why is this happening? It's because Hussein says, and Hussein knows that this place, these are where the chains and the ropes will be tied on Zainab. Because Abbas won't be there to protect you, ya Zainab. Oh, my dear sister. If only Hussein in his last moments could go to his daughter Sakina and give her a few more kisses on her cheeks. But he would never be able to say something to Sakina as in, Sakina, let me place some kisses on those cheeks that Shimr and Khudi will come and slap. Oh Sakina, let me kiss those ears of yours, the place where the earrings will be ripped off and blood will begin to pour. If Hussein could only kiss the dress of Sakina, which will be burnt as she's running throughout the forest. But this is something Hussein would be unable to do. على لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. ماتم حسين.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, छलके हुए हैं आंसू आँखों के जाम ले लो। हसरत की सुबह ले लो, गुर्बत की शाम ले लो, दर साहिबे अज़ा का मौला सलाम ले लो, टूटे हुए दिलों का मुड़कर सलाम ले लो, का सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम। शिमरे लई चलाई शमशीर किस गले पर, ज़हरा के दिल पे जालिम खंजर तेरा रवा है, ए दर्द दिल संभलना ये वक्त इम्तिहान है, आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले, आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो। अब्बास के अलम की याद आएगी निशानी, पानी तो गिर चुका है, टुकड़े है गम से सीना, आंसू बहा रहा है मशकी जाए सकीना, का सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, छलके हुए हैं आंसू आँखों के मले, खून में तड़प रहा है करियल जवान बेटा, शब्बीर है अकेले मैयत बड़ी जवान है, लेला संभाल लेना अकबर की लाश जाकर, आका सलाम ले लो, छलके हुए हैं आंसू आँखों के जाम ले, मिट्टी हुई नबी की परदेस में निशानी, वो बाप की निगाह वो खून की रवानी, नजरों में फिर रही है अकबर की नौजवानी, का सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, छलके हुए हैं आंसू के जाम ले लो, डूबी हुई लहू में असगर की बेज़बानी, तिश्ना दहन है बच्चे अशकों की वो रवानी, याद आ रहा है दरिया याद आ रहा है पानी, का सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, छलके हुए हैं आंसू जो के जाम, भूलेगा क्या जमाना आशूर की तबाही, जलते हुए वो खैमे लूटी हुई वो शाही, तुरबत बसा चुका है नन्ना एक सिपाही, आका सलाम ले मौला सलाम ले लो, आका सलाम ले लो, मौला सलाम ले लो, छलके हुए हैं आंसू आँखों के जाम ले लो, या हुसैन या हुसैन। अल फातिहा।
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح النبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة. لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من متلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبيابكم موقن بشرائع الدين وخواتيم عملي. وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الزكي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم، وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم، وفزتم فوزا عظيما. فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما، وأقدمهم إيمانا، وأقومهم بدين الله، وأحوطهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم الأخ المواسي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر، والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن، عجل الله فرجه وسخر الله مخرجه ودهورك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.